This abandoned building once held hundreds of people who weren't allowed to leave. Welcome to Rauceby Hospital, originally opened in 1870 as the Kesteven County Asylum. Behind these walls were locked wards, isolation cells, and patients sent here for reasons that today would shock you, from severe mental illness to conditions Victorian society simply didn't understand. For over a century, this place operated as a self-contained world, a town of doctors, nurses, and hundreds of forgotten lives hidden from the outside. It finally closed in 1997. Since then, the buildings have been left to rot, collapsing ceilings, flooded corridors, and rooms frozen exactly as they were abandoned. Today, we're going inside to see what 127 years of history have left behind and what still remains in the silence. Because once these doors close behind you, there's only one way out. Let's explore. Welcome to Nick Nic's Adventures, where travel meets urban exploration and forgotten history comes back to life. From epic holidays to abandoned buildings, hidden places, and stories they left behind, we uncover the past while chasing new adventures. If you love exploring the unknown, discovering lost sites, and seeing the world differently, you're in the right place. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to join this adventure. By the mid-19th century, overcrowding in existing asylums had become a major concern. Industrialisation had transformed society, and with it came a rise in awareness and fear of mental illness. County authorities were legally required to provide accommodation for the mentally ill. So in the late 1860s, work began on a new asylum just outside the village of Rauceby near Sleaford. The location was carefully chosen, rural, isolated yet accessible by rail. Fresh air, farmland, and distance from urban chaos were believed to be therapeutic. When the asylum opened in 1870, it was designed to house around 300 patients. Like many Victorian institutions, it was built on the corridor plan, long wings radiating from a central administrative hub, separating men and women while allowing staff to monitor movements. The architecture was imposing but orderly, red brick, tall windows and high ceilings. To Victorian eyes, it symbolised progress and compassion. To patients arriving here, it often meant something else entirely, the loss of freedom. Life in the Kesteven County Asylum followed a strict routine. Days were structured from dawn until lights out, with work forming the backbone of treatment. Patients who were able worked on the asylum's extensive grounds. Men farmed fields, tended gardens, repaired buildings, or laboured in the workshops. Women worked in laundries, kitchens and sewing rooms. The labour kept the institution largely self-sufficient, producing food, clothing and supplies on site. To administrators, this was therapeutic occupation. To many patients, it was simply unpaid labour. Yet conditions here were not necessarily the horror stories often associated with Victorian asylums. Compared to prisons or workhouses, some patients experienced better nutrition, warmth and medical care than they had known on the outside. Still, treatments could be harsh by modern standards. Sedatives, restraints and isolation rooms were used when patients became agitated. Mental illness was poorly understood and diagnoses were broad. Epilepsy, dementia, depression, learning disabilities and even alcoholism could all lead to admission. For some, the asylum became a permanent home. Just imagine what these could be turned into, although they're probably too far gone now. Probably ready for demolition. I'm just having a walk over. Nick, she'll kill me if I call her Nicky. He's over yonder. She's just summoned me, so just having a walk over. camera back round. You'll see Nick stood over by the building. Stunning. Look at these, absolutely stunning.
See, this chivalry is definitely dead. Come and get me down.
Come on.
Come on.
If I can get down, you're going to look
I just want to hold my hand.
By the late 19th century, the asylum had grown into a small town behind walls. At its peak, it housed thousands of patients and employed a large staff of nurses, attendants, cooks, engineers and administrators. The site included farm buildings and livestock, workshops and stores, recreation halls, a chapel, kitchens and bakery, and water supply and power systems. Patients attended church services, concerts, dances, and several celebrations. Cricket matches and outdoor activities were organised within the grounds. Victorian reformers believed that structured recreation could calm disturbed minds. Despite the confinement, moments of normality existed here. As the decades passed, patient numbers rose steadily. New wings were added and temporary wards were constructed to cope with demand. By the early 20th century, the asylum housed far more people than originally intended. Overcrowding strained resources and staff. Long-term patients accumulated, many abandoned by families or transferred from other institutions. Discharge rates were low. Mental health care had become institutional care, and institutions rarely shrank. When the First World War began in 1914, asylums across Britain were drawn into the national effort. Some patients and staff enlisted, while others remained behind to keep the institution running with reduced personnel. Food shortages, supply problems and staffing crises made life harder for everybody inside. Conditions deteriorated, and though the asylum continued to operate throughout the conflict, the war also brought new forms of psychological trauma, what was then called shell shock. While military hospitals handled most cases, the war changed public understanding of mental illness forever. The interwar years saw gradual change. Medical approaches shifted, though slowly. New therapies were introduced, including occupational therapy and early physical treatments. Electric shock therapy and insulin coma therapy would later become common across psychiatric hospitals. Controversial methods intended to manage severe mental illness. Despite these changes, the fundamental model remained the same: large numbers of people living in long-term institutional care. During the Second World War, Rauceby again faced major disruption. Staff shortages returned and resources were diverted to the war effort. Some hospital buildings across Britain were converted for military use or emergency medical services. While Rauceby continued operating as a psychiatric facility, wartime pressures intensified overcrowding and reduced standards of care, yet the hospital endured. a constant presence while the world outside changed dramatically. In 1948, Britain's healthcare system was transformed with the creation of the National Health Service. The Kesteven County Asylum was absorbed into the NHS and renamed Rauceby Hospital. This marked a new era. Mental health care was becoming a medical speciality rather than a custodial system. Treatments improved, staff training expanded, and attitudes began slowly to shift. New medications, particularly antipsychotic drugs introduced in the 1950s, allowed many patients to live outside institutions for the first time. But the change was uneven. Large hospitals like Rauceby still housed hundreds of long-stay residents who had nowhere else to go. By the 1950s and 60s, life inside Rauceby Hospital had evolved but retained echoes of the past. Patients wore their own clothes more often, wards became less rigid, recreational activities expanded to include radio, television, crafts and organised events. Staff increasingly aimed to rehabilitate rather than simply contain. Yet overcrowding remained a persistent issue. Many residents had lived there for decades. For them, hospital was no longer a temporary refuge, it was home. From the 1960s onward, government policy shifted decisively away from large psychiatric hospitals. Community care became the new model. Rather than isolating patients in remote institutions, treatment would be provided in local settings wherever possible. This policy, known as Deinstitutionalization, led to the gradual downsizing of facilities like Rauceby. Wards closed, patient numbers fell, buildings became underused and harder to maintain. By the 1980s, many of Britain's Victorian asylums were either shutting down or being repurposed. Rauceby Hospital finally closed in 1997, bringing 127 years of continuous operation to an end. Patients were relocated to smaller facilities, community housing. Staff moved on, equipment was removed and doors were locked. For brief periods, part of the site was reused, including as offices and training facilities, but much of the complex fell into disuse. Without constant maintenance, decay set in quickly. Roofs began to fall, water penetrated walls, vandals stripped fittings and smashed windows, and nature crept back, reclaiming paths, courtyards, and the wards that once housed hundreds of people. Today, Rauceby Hospital stands as a haunting monument to bygone era of mental health care. Long corridors stretch into the darkness, paint peels from the damp walls, rusting bed frames and broken furniture hint at lives once lived here. Outside, the trees grow where patients once walked under supervision. Paths are choked with weeds, and buildings that once symbolised progress now feel frozen in time. For urban explorers, historians and filmmakers, the site offers a powerful atmosphere, both eerie and deeply human. Places like Rauceby are reminders of how society has treated mental illness across generations. For some patients, the asylum offered safety, routine and care they could not find elsewhere. For others, it represented confinement, stigma and separation from the world. The truth lies somewhere in between. What is certain is that thousands of lives have passed through these wards, patients, doctors, nurses and workers alike. Birthdays were celebrated here, friendships formed, people recovered and others never left. When the buildings fell silent in 1997, those stories did not disappear. They linger in every corridor, every empty room and every faded photograph. As the wind moves through broken windows and the sun sets over abandoned grounds, Rauceby Hospital stands not just as a ruin, but as a testament to changing attitudes towards mental health, medicine and human dignity. From Victorian optimism to modern community care, the site witnessed more than a century of transformation. And though its doors are closed and its wards are empty, the echoes of past remain, waiting for those who come to listen.
So we're just heading off out now. We've shown you around, I want to say 90% of the buildings that we could get into. So yeah, just leaving now. What a fascinating place. We've just been having a discussion and I reckon we're going to come back with a medium, get a few of us to come back, see what we can find. So stay tuned for that, and don't forget to follow us on Nick and Nic's Adventures. Plenty more where this comes from. I hope you enjoy. See you later.